when you find out what you need, the next thing is to give yourself that thing. Because you can answer the question and then not give it to yourself. And that's not really going to do that full job of getting unstuck. But it's you in that pattern of asking yourself what you need and giving it to yourself that is going to be the thing that gets you unstuck. Hello and welcome to the Unlock Lab. I'm your host, Tosca DiMatteo. Welcome to episode 60. It's got a title that's a little bold and audacious, but I actually really believe in it. And the title is the number one question to get yourself unstuck. What is that question? Well, before I answer, if you're new to the podcast, let me first say welcome. I'm so glad you're here. I'm Tosca DiMatteo. I'm the founder of Tosca Coaching and Consulting, and I do work in helping others at the intersection of personal growth and professional breakthroughs. My key topics that I talk about are inner critics, influencing change, and personal branding when it comes to keynotes. But there's a whole lot of stuff I have to say. And if you want to learn more about my content and my offerings, please visit CoachTosca.com. That's CoachTosca.com. All right, so I'm just going to set the stage for you right now. It's a Friday, and it's been several days of rainy weather. So speaking of needs, I definitely need the sun to come out, but the plan is for it to come out this weekend. So I'm looking forward to that. I am so glad that I'm talking to you about this topic because, gosh, I think we have this massive conditioning around not asking ourselves what we need. As women, I think we've been conditioned to focus on what do others need first and foremost. And I think even men, there's a lot of conditioning around it doesn't matter what you need to provide and protect. And so go do. So I always say like the patriarchy impacts everybody. It shows up in different ways and all the things. And I have seen time and time again, not only in my life, but with my clients, that when you're feeling overwhelmed or when you're feeling frustrated or unsatisfied, maybe even bored, or maybe you're just overall emotional about everything, you can kind of feel stuck. And one of my, I don't want to call it a magic bullet because there's no magic bullet, I think, in life. But one of my go-tos tools in my toolbox and that I bring to my clients is to ask them this one question, which is, what do you need? Asking and answering this question is something that can create a massive shift for yourself. Now, let me just say right off the bat that for some people, this is a very hard question. So if you're sitting there like, I have no idea what I need in this moment, you are not alone. And it's super hard when we're in a tough emotional spot. So I want to talk more about this question of what do I need? But before I get to that, if it feels impossible to answer that, or if you're getting emotional about it, here's what I want you to do first. I want you to feel what you're feeling. Let those emotions come up because emotions are energy in motion. And if you help them to keep moving, they will transform. Those emotions will turn into something else eventually. And perhaps when that happens, you will be able to come back to this question and ask yourself what you need. The other thing about giving yourself permission to feel is that you'll have a better understanding of how you truly feel at the core. Because oftentimes when we identify those big emotions like anger, fear, or sadness, there are deeper, more nuanced things underneath that. One of the books that I frequently recommend to my clients is called Atlas of the Heart by Brené Brown. And that's because she articulates something like 86 emotions. And there is growth and there is healing that's possible in just being able to name what you feel. It's kind of magical in a way because it sounds simple, but when you can better understand yourself, think about it. When you can better understand what you're going through, what your emotions are, it is from that point that you can make the next choice about what now. This concept is also really important in terms of like feeling your feelings because so many of us grow up burying our feelings. I did this for most of my life, allowed my feelings to get stuffed in order to kind of get through the moment. But eventually, I learned that it was so important to allow my feelings to be expressed and to come up and to be released. I mean, that's been a huge part of my healing journey. And the next part of my healing journey, really, after giving myself permission to be uncomfortable with my feelings and to give myself the time and space to move through them, the very next part of that is what I'm talking to you about today, which is asking yourself this question of what do you need? And you can literally ask yourself this question any time of day. You can ask it when you're triggered. You can ask it in the morning. You can ask it in the evening when you're not sure how to use your time. You can really create a practice out of this. And what you might need can, oh my gosh, it can range dramatically and drastically. And sometimes it can even surprise you because when you're really tapping in to yourself, when you're really getting at the core of your truth about what you need, you might actually dismiss it because maybe it's something that sounds weird to you or stupid, or how is that going to help? This usually happens when we feel like the answer to what we need came out of nowhere or we can't even connect to it. But it's actually a really good sign because when this happens, when you're just like, why did that come up? And you can't rationalize why you need that thing, it probably means that it's coming from a deep place within your knowing. And like, woohoo, like I'm celebrating that for you because that's what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do with this question is really get at the deepest layer of what you're needing, right? Because we could say, well, what I need is a drink. Is that what you need? Maybe what you need is relief underneath that. Maybe what you need is to give yourself a break. Maybe what you need is a moment to not think about things or to make a decision. So you can go pretty deep with this question of what do I need? Because look, trust, I can tell myself I need a whiskey soda right now, but I know when I need that, what it's actually telling me is I need to just let go. I need to relax. I need to not think. And I can choose the beverage or I can choose something else. But I've just gotten in the habit, right, of asking myself, like, what do I really need? So I want to give you some examples of like what this looks like in real life and like what can show up in those really hard moments. And I was thinking about this example from actually a long time ago, years ago. I was in a really bad place in one of my corporate jobs. And I was working so hard to get out of there and to find another job. I mean, I could tell at the time I was getting pushed out and I felt super demoralized. I was stuck. I was in a rut. I was just not myself every day. And now at this stage, I wasn't on my path of like true healing or even aware of this question that I'm telling you about. But at the time, I did ask my younger brother, Adrian, for something. I asked him to write me a song. I don't know why. I mean, of course, he's an insanely talented musician, but looking back, when I look at, well, why did I ask him to write me a song? I think it was because what I needed was to feel less alone. I think what I needed was to hear my story from the outside. And let me tell you, Adrian nailed this song. And to this day, it remains one of my all time favorite songs he's ever composed. And trust me, he's composed a lot. The song is called The Daily Grind. And the link to this song I'm going to put in the show notes because I just love it. And it really reflects the emotions that I had at that time. So there's an example of I wasn't even aware that I had this need. And I asked for what I needed, which is just to hear my life a little bit reflected in a song. I give you another more recent example, literally just the other day. I had a really hard therapy session. I was super emotional and, it was hard to let out all the emotion in that session, namely also because I had to get on a subway and not be a hot mess, hopefully. And so I definitely expressed some emotion, but there was also a lot that I was holding back. And the very next day, It was an okay day, but I was feeling a little bit restless in the evening and it was pouring outside. And I just felt like I just don't want to sit on the couch right now. I don't want to read. I don't want to watch TV. What do I need? And when I asked myself what I needed, I shouldn't have been surprised, right? It was like I need to go to the gym. I need to go get on a treadmill and just release some stuff because I think my body had held on to some stuff right in that therapy session and I needed to be able to release it somatically and with my body and so I did. Even though it was pouring outside, I pushed myself out to do it because I was like, "Oh, I this is what I need." And yes, it made me feel better for sure. And I know that about myself. I know that movement is important for me. But here's the other thing about when you find out what you need, right? The next thing is to give yourself that thing. Because you can answer the question and then not give it to yourself. And that's not really going to do that full job of getting unstuck. But it's you in that pattern of asking yourself what you need and giving it to yourself that is going to be the thing that gets you unstuck. I love when I ask my clients this question in those pivotal moments where there is a clear need that's under the surface. And I love when I ask it because I can sense the surprise and delight once my clients realize how easy it is for them to access that. And usually that's because the pump has been primed in our conversation, but that more often than not, the answer to that question, what do I need, comes pretty quickly. And that is just being able to tap into your inner knowing. The answers that I've gotten when I've asked my clients range from, I need to take 2 weeks off of work to, I need to have that conversation with my sister and tell her how I feel to, I need accountability to get this thing accomplished once and for all. It's something that is this tool in the toolbox that I think we don't talk about enough because I think so many of us are walking around a little resentful, maybe a little upset, a little bit not as happy as we want to be. And a big part of that can be traced back to, are you giving yourself what you need? Are you honoring that? Are you even asking yourself the question? See, I find that this question helps us to take our power back from whatever is getting us down, to remember that we have the ability to change our internal world. And when we change that internal world of ours, will affect change in our external world. That's how we get unstuck because we start with ourselves. Hopefully you're picking up what I'm putting down. It may take some practice because we're conditioned not to ask this. We're conditioned to plow through and just get all the things done, not pause and not say, oh, geez, I've been sitting in this desk for 8 hours. Maybe I actually need to stretch and get up and re-energize my body. We're barely scratching the surface on bringing this into regular everyday practice. Speaking of practice, this will take practice to remind yourself to ask yourself this question. Sometimes I forget that this is a tool in my toolbox because of the long period of time in which I live my life without asking myself this question. And one of the practices that I've offered my clients is to start your day with this question, to make it a habit, not just when you're in a hard place or when the emotions are tough, but to make it a part of your life, to honor your needs. And building the habit will help you to be able to recognize in those moments, let's say when you're triggered, you have this immediate tool you can access. Ooh, what do I need? And when we're triggered, this is a beautiful time to use this question because often when we're triggered, we can't come back to center and kind of operate in a way where we feel good. So when you're triggered, if you remember nothing else, you can ask yourself, what do I need? And the answer to that, again, it can range, but it might be, I need to walk away from this conversation right now. I need to pardon myself and go to the bathroom so I can give myself some space. It might be, I need to think about this more before I respond. It might be, I need to express how that person made me feel when they told me that thing. And it might be, I don't know. And that's okay too, because the point is that you're building up this muscle of identifying what you need. And if you don't know in the moment, maybe that's your answer. You could say, I'm actually a bit bothered right now. I don't know how to respond to you. And just let that pause be enough in that moment and see what happens. And look, this type of thing, this challenge with even understanding what our needs are, can come from deep in our past. Lots of stuff that I talk about on this podcast often starts deep in our past that we don't really want to think about. But listen, if you grew up in an environment where your needs didn't matter or your needs weren't met, whether that was physical needs, emotional needs, or what have you, or if you shrank your needs in order to make other people feel comfortable, this is why this can be such a hard thing. So if if you're just like, why is this so hard for me? This is normal. This happens to so many people. And now you have the tool to come back and say, you know what? I deserve to honor what I need. I deserve to even know what I need so that I can meet that need myself, or maybe ask somebody else to help fill that need. What I'm saying about this tool being empowering is because when you ask yourself what you need, you are also asking yourself, how can I give myself what I need? Now, giving yourself what you need might literally mean I'm taking a vacation, I'm giving myself what I need, but it also might mean I need to ask somebody else to help me fill this need that I have. So it can go both ways. It can be, what can I do right now in this moment to address my need? But it can also be you extending a hand out and saying, I can't do this alone. And I actually have a need where I need to reach out. And woo, that's called vulnerability, right? Asking somebody else to support you or help you or give you something that you can't give yourself. And that's part of this work too. But I don't want to scare you off with the big V word. I'm laughing because, vulnerability is I think the very first healing concept that I worked with in my life was giving myself permission to be more vulnerable, because all I wanted to do was be the strong one and be the one that can handle all the things. So one of the very first steps in my journey was learning how to be more vulnerable, learning how to ask people for support and what I needed, learning to be able to tell my story and say, this is what I'm experiencing. And it's hard. I'm going to take a quick pause for you to digest some of this conversation already, to share with you that this episode has been sponsored by a company that has actually been born and bred out of my neighborhood. In fact, the CEO is a friend of mine. I want to pause and tell you about this company, which is called Mindset Migraine. And what a perfect time to actually talk about this, because I think one of the things that we overlook in terms of needs has to do with our body and our health. And I say this because I know the pattern that I used to have with ignoring my body. And I have since learned to honor it and recognize that I deserve to pursue solutions for things my body is struggling with. Almost 40 million Americans suffer from migraines. And if you're one of them, check out Mindset Migraine Defense. It's a science-backed supplement designed to help reduce the frequency, severity, and duration of attacks. It uses only clinically studied ingredients with no fillers or fluff, just what works. And if you know me, I also appreciate getting just what you need. So if you need something more personalized, Mindset can also tailor blends to your specific needs. To learn more, visit mindsetmigraine.com and use the code Tosca for a discount on your first order. You can also visit the show notes of this episode for the link. All right, back to regularly scheduled programming. So you may realize you have a need that feels big, right? So let's just say the need that feels big for you right now is this need for like a legit 2-week vacation, right? And you may say to yourself, well, I know I need an extended vacation, but I can't give that to myself right now. Okay, fair. So then my counsel would be to ask yourself, well, what can you give yourself that honors what that need is really about? Like the need about a vacation might really be about a mental break. So maybe honoring that need could look like taking 30 minutes for yourself that day for just you to give yourself a mental break. It could also look like taking an action on planning that vacation to make it real, to let yourself know, I know that I have this need, I honor it, and I'm actually going to move forward in honoring that. Another example might be you might know you need to have a really difficult conversation. And that difficult conversation could be with a boss, a coworker, a family member, whatever. And you may say to yourself, I know I need to have that conversation, but I'm not ready. And that's okay. Taking that first step of acknowledging I do need to have that conversation is huge because you know what you need to do from that point. And often, what needs to happen with this particular example I'm talking about is that you need to find more clarity in what it is you need to express in that difficult conversation. And getting underneath that understanding of what you need to express is a wonderful first action to take. And that action, that identification is a powerful thing to help you get unstuck because you are taking hold of the wheel of your life and saying, what do I need to do? As opposed to, well, I need that person to change or I need that person to make a different decision. The more that you can ask yourself, what do I need? And what can I do to give it to myself? You are well on your way to not just getting unstuck, but to thriving. Because when we can look at ourselves first and say, I can actually give this to myself. Like I can give myself a break. I can take the burden off my shoulders, or I can validate myself. I don't need my boss to tell me how awesome I am. I can say that to myself and know that I'm on the path. This topic of really asking yourself what you need runs so deep. And what I don't want to miss about this is the piece around what our bodies need, because I think that when we've gone through really tough things in our life, sometimes it's easy to ignore our bodies because we're just trying to survive and get to the next day. And we're just trying to do all the things and we're focused on distraction and we just want problems to go away. So we don't actually stop to say what is screaming at me. And oftentimes when we're not in the habit of really asking ourselves what our body needs, we can end up in a situation where our body is literally screaming at us and saying, hey, you can't ignore this anymore. And this has happened a few times in my life. And I really hope that I've figured it out and that I don't have to keep learning this lesson. And I want to share it with you because I think this is common and I don't want you to end up in a situation that you could have avoided. So one of the very first times that I really recognized that I was ignoring what my body needed was in those months prior to being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. I mean, I had every single symptom under the sun for this chronic illness, and I ignored it for literally 3 months. I was thirsty all the time. I had to go to the bathroom all the time. I was exhausted easily, and the symptoms go on. I was just not at that point in my life where I was honoring my body and appreciating it and listening to it. By some miracle, I was able to go and get diagnosed before I had a bigger problem. I could have easily gone into a diabetic coma because it had been a long time. I mean, I was literally drinking Kool-Aid because my body actually needed sugar, but it wasn't able to get any because my pancreas stopped working. So, this may sound like an extreme example, but what can I say? This is my example. This is my life. And I just don't want you to end up having a health challenge that is even harder to overcome because you were ignoring what you needed. I'll give you another example of when I ignored my needs and it got to the point where my body was telling me I couldn't ignore it anymore. And that was happening when I was in a role working for a manager that did not support me, that really kind of tore me down. And I had lost all my confidence and I was just trying and trying and trying to make this thing work. I knew I was miserable and I knew I was unhappy and I knew that I needed to get out of there, but I just wasn't willing to make the call because I was there to just keep on trying to get my boss to support me and like me and acknowledge me, right? And it wasn't until I woke up one morning with that familiar feeling of butterflies in my stomach, a knot in my stomach, and just like the fear of looking at my email inbox. And that was happening for actually at least a week, maybe longer, of like literally my body clenching. And I finally realized because of my body that I needed to get out of the situation. And if I had honored earlier on what I really needed and what was good for me, then I wouldn't have gotten to that point where it became physical. Because not only did I have that experience of recognizing that my body was telling me it was time to leave, I also was sick for like the next week of just purging and releasing all the stuff that I had been holding onto and that was held within my body because of the stressful situation I was in and just an environment that wasn't supportive. So I share these stories again. Maybe you've had a similar experience. Maybe you know somebody that you want to share this podcast episode with because you're concerned that they're not addressing their needs. Share it with love and just say, hey, I think you might get something out of this. But it also, I think, exemplifies the power of being in tune and in touch with yourself and regularly asking, what do I need right now? What I'm hoping you take away from this entire conversation is you have the power to get unstuck. And the number one tool that you can start to use, that you can start to build into your life, that perhaps you can even start to journal on or ask yourself daily or multiple times daily, which is, what is it I need now? Kinds of stories that I'm sharing with you today are the kinds of things I also share from the stage as a speaker. In my talk about influencing change, for example, I talk about how we're able to influence change by listening to others in order to better understand their needs, which is much like a consultant does to assess how they can support a business. These topics they transcend personal growth into professional breakthroughs. And listen, if you want to learn more about my speaking offerings and the things that I talk about, be sure to visit toscadimatteo.com/speaker. And you'll definitely have a great starting point there. You can always reach out to me also on my website, on my contact page. And that's toscadimatteo.com/contact. So speaking of needs, I'd love to ask you for something, which is that if you got something from this episode, please like, rate, and review this podcast on whatever platform you're on. Because by doing so, you just might help someone else get what they need by discovering this podcast. If you're listening and this ends up hanging with you for a while and you're just like, I don't even know how to move forward with this topic of what do I need? I don't even know how to answer it, then please reach out because I'm happy to have a conversation with you. No strings attached. I just want you to get unstuck. That's the whole point of this podcast, is to get unstuck. So thank you so much for tuning in. I hope that you get everything that you need today. And I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. But ciao for now.